All right. So, tēnā koutou katoa, no America ho no te tematanga, uh, no otatahi toku kāinga e nei nei, e roia toko tunga mahi o Perryfield Lawyers, ko Stephen mo toko ingoa, no reira ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Really great to have so many of you joining us this afternoon. We're looking forward to it. My name is Stephen Moe, and I'm joined by two colleagues, Anne-Marie and Michael, and I'll get you both to introduce yourselves briefly in a second. But we thought we'd kickstart with having a karakia just to welcome us all into this space. So we will do that now. Whakataka te hao ki te uru, whakataka te hao ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti he Māori ora. All right, so thank you so much for joining us. As I said, my name's Stephen Moe. I'm a partner at Perryfield Lawyers. We're kind of becoming quite well known for supporting charities and groups that are what we call for-purpose organizations. And as part of that commitment to this sector, we like to hold frequent webinars and we like to give people information that will assist them. Just to tell you, as follow-up to this, we will send an email that has some slides and some information that we talk about, but it's going to be the three of us having a bit of a conversation, a bit of a korero, and the main thing that we are going to focus on here is governance documents and the need to keep them up to date and how you go about updating them. So before we get into that topic, maybe each of you, would you mind just introducing yourselves?
Kia ora e te whānau, ko Anne-Marie aho, and it's a real privilege to be working with so many charities actually, because we get to witness the important work that they do for our community. And it's always a pleasure to pass on some ideas as well.
Yeah, hi. My name's Michael. I have the pleasure of working with these two lovely individuals, supporting, as has been stated, a lot of charities. Yeah, do the fantastic work and really get secondhand good feelings from supporting them. Essentially, while we are, lawyers, yeah, we get to rub shoulders with some people that do some incredible work. So happy to be, yeah, supporting.
Yeah, it's great. And we have a team, probably about 15 of us in what we call the impact team. So we're supporting groups not only with the questions we're going to look at today, but also with property, buying and selling, businesses, leases, all of those different things. Bear that in mind as well. And we're really doing this because we want to support charities, for-purpose organizations to thrive. So we want to download what we know so that you can take it to your boards and your groups and have proactive discussions. Now, before we hit record, we were asking what's the weather like where you are, and many of you used the chat function to let us know it's raining or it's sunny. Actually, I think it was sunny everywhere. That was awesome. But that proves that you know how to use the chat function. So we would love to have your questions as we're going through this. Please use the chat as a way to interact with us. Type in your hard questions or your easy ones. There's no such thing as a silly question.
Yeah.
No such thing as something that you shouldn't ask. So please use this as a resource. We will do our best to answer them as we're talking. We'll do a little bit of a presentation first, but then we will at the end make sure that we've covered every single question. The other thing is some of you, I know, I've seen the names. Some of you have real wisdom in this sector. So if we're talking and you're like, oh, they should mention this, or there's a resource over there, please help us put it in the comments. We welcome that. We would love to have this be as interactive as possible. Ideally, we'd be in the same room and we'd have some food we were all eating together. But this is kind of the next best thing. So we're here to help. And we would love to hear your questions, so don't be afraid to use the chat and ask them. So stepping back from that side of things, we've got to ask, why are we here today? And it's really around something that we think is a new legal requirement. So, Emery, can you give us a bit of a download? Like, what is it that's changed? Why is it the people here need to understand that maybe there's some things they hadn't been aware of before?
Yeah, so You may or may not know that it is now an obligation on anyone who has charitable status in New Zealand to review their governance procedures every 3 years. And that's a recent piece of legislation that has come into effect. And I think we like to think of it a little bit like housework. I mean, everyone loves it when the housework is done and it makes sure that everything is nice and tidy and organized and not chaotic. And so, in doing this review, it's a real opportunity for charities to make sure that their documents are all accurate and reflect what happens in practice and that they know what is in their documents, and also to think about their practices and to reflect on whether some aspects of the way that they do things may need to be changed. So we see it as a really good opportunity, and we're all about trying to demystify it and break it into little pieces so that it doesn't seem like an overwhelming task. And so that's what we're going to do today.
Yeah. But I think it's a really important thing to remember that the founding documents, it's not like they're written in stone, to use kind of this is not the Ten Commandments, it will never change. Founding documents should be organic, and I like to think of them as living to reflect the changing circumstances. So I can't tell you how many times, and I know that the two of you will agree with me, how many times have we seen founding documents and actually they were totally relevant and appropriate in 1972 or in 1954, but they have not been changed since then. So in a way, this is kind of a cleaning up that can happen, which is important. And also, it's something that is now legally required. So we can include in the follow-up the actual section, which says you have to do this, but it's something that we have to have on our radar. And you should be asking at your boardroom table, when was the last time that we looked at our rules, and do we need to make sure that they're up to speed? Yeah. So, Emery, I'll turn to you again. Just a quick question. Why is it that we're doing this? Like, what would updated rules be achieving? Why is it useful?
Yeah, and that's such a great point. I mean, if your rules are from 1965, and that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but the reality is law has changed in the recent years when it comes to charitable trusts and incorporated societies. So if your rules don't take account of those recent law changes, it probably puts you at somewhat of a disadvantage. So it's really good to and probably a key law that came in was in 2019 with the Trusts Act, and that has quite a strong bearing on what trustees need to do. And we also have the new Incorporated Societies Act 2022. So they're recent things, and the Charities Act has also changed. So in looking at your rules, it's an opportunity to make sure that they actually reflect what is required of you legally. But as well as that, it's an opportunity to reflect on whether your rules work for you in practice. So do you follow them, or do you kind of do your own thing? And that's where things can get a little bit sketchy too, because you do need to be following your rules. And if they're really out of date and don't reflect current practice, then it's a great idea to bring them up to date.
That's right. And it's just in case you're curious, it's 42G of the Charities Act 2005. That's the provision that now requires it. I'm just going to read it, and then I'm going to ask you a question, Michael. So be ready. Basically, it says a charitable entity must review its governance procedures, whether those are set out in its rules or elsewhere. We're going to come back to that. At least every 3 years. When conducting a review under subsection 1, the charitable entity must consider whether its governance procedures are fit for purpose, assist the charitable entity to achieve its charitable purpose, and assist the charitable entity to comply with the requirements of this act. So that fit for purpose is the phrase that's used within this context. So, Michael, what else might be important for people to be thinking about when they're updating or thinking of updating the rules?
Yeah. So I think looking at your documents is definitely important. And I think, as stated, that can be your, foundational document. So that whether that's your constitution or your trust deed, or I know different organizations use slightly different names or colorful names to
Hmm.
describe their, founding document. There's also other documents that, come alongside that, which will need to be reviewed. Um, the purpose, as Stephen mentioned, it's a requirement to do it every 3 years. And the reason and the motivation for that is that it's not a review that you take now or after, attending this webinar and then leave about another, for another 10 years or 20 years. It's something that you need to, on repeat every 3 years, turn your mind to even more frequently if there are major shifts and changes within your organization. And the reason for that is if you are up to date, if you are ensuring that your founding documents, your key documents are, in line with the latest legislation, they reflect how your organization operates, you're constantly evolving to be, operating in an appropriate manner, protecting yourself, to ensure that the work that you continue to do can carry on.
Yeah, and I think we see lots of different examples where things go wrong. So, from my perspective, there's two that I want to highlight to you. The first one is that the rules say one thing, but the practice is another. So, for example, the rules themselves might say something like, before a meeting, 2 weeks written notice must be given to this group.
Yeah.
That's just one example. And so you look at the rules and you ask the client, and they say, well, actually, we've never done this
Mm.
ever. We have never complied with the rules. And that then introduces interesting questions about whether the meetings have been held validly. It's a whole Pandora's box I'm not going to go into here.
Mm.
But the principle is that the rules should reflect the way that you actually operate.
Mm.
They should not be disconnected from the reality of what your organization does. And that includes things like tikanga, custom, even language. I would want to see that a trust deed or a constitution is reflective of the kaupapa, the purpose of that organization. So that might involve translating some of the parts of your document, for example. It might involve having a different process from what is normal in a trust, but it's relevant and applicable for your trust. So you want to make it bespoke. The second way that I see people go wrong is that the purposes have not been reviewed for many, many years. And it's a totally understandable and natural situation, isn't it? Because we were set up to start a preschool. Oh, look, there's some funding over there to help high school students. Oh, there's another funding stream. It's to help mental health with university students. There's some more funding for suicide prevention among post, career people. And it's like your purpose was to operate a preschool for 3 and 4 year old children. Because of the ways that funding has gone, you've ended up helping suicide prevention for 30-year-olds. And there's a disconnect then between the purpose and what you were originally set up for. So I would want to make sure that actually your purposes are fit for purpose and that they're what you're meant to be doing. One thing to throw in here is sometimes your rules will have restrictions on what you're allowed to change or not change. So there will be a clause called amendments and variations. So it's important to read that really carefully because sometimes the original people put some parts safeguarded. This clause cannot be changed. So you're going to have to bear that in mind. And we may cover this later, but just to mention, there's kind of two ways. Number one, you tweak and amend your rules, like add in little bits and pieces here and there. Number two, you adopt totally new rules that are more modern and bespoke. I see this a lot as well. Some of you will know where I'm going with this. The chairman, like in 1965, that was probably just what it was in society. Whereas today we would talk about the chair or the chairperson instead. So keep your rules up to date. It's really important.
Yeah.
And then flowing on from here, we've got some other things. So we're going to talk about this, but remember when I read from the section, it talked about the governance procedures. In our mind, that is actually really interesting because it's broader than just the trust deed or the constitution or the founding document of the entity. So that's kind of easy. The trust deed, that's how you started, or the constitution, that's how you started. But our view is that governance procedures or governance documents is a broader conception, and I think it would capture things like policies. So this is an interesting point for you all to consider. We're hoping that some of this is challenging for you. Do you have policies in place? How about privacy policy? How about health and safety policies? How about child protection policies? How about conflicts of interest policies? How about a board charter? Like the list will go on. We've actually done a guide on policies, which is a free download. While one of you is talking, I'll put it in the chat so you can download it. But the challenge here is that it's probably a bit more than just the founding document. So, Michael, do you want to go into maybe expand on some of what I've said there?
Yeah, so governance documents, as mentioned, those are things like constitutions for incorporated societies and trust deeds for charitable trusts. Um, I think the things to look out for in there is, as Stephen mentioned, drift within an organization where your purposes are set up for one reason, but you've naturally transitioned or shifted across to covering purposes. So, in that mind frame, what you would look to do is see if you can expand your purposes a little bit, not necessarily drifting entirely across, but creating enough scope for your organization. If there are governance procedures in terms of when to call a meeting, how many people should be on your board. I think recently a client came to us, which I found quite interesting, with they had I think 7 people on their board currently, but their procedure document says you have your maximum is 5. So by having that many people, that was an issue. So this type of review and audit of your internal processes, I guess, discovers some curly things, some weird procedures that don't necessarily make sense maybe in the current mechanism. I think we've all seen post-COVID how much we've used systems like this, online meetings, Zooms, etc., to conduct meetings, to have member procedures. From a charitable trust side, that's permissible now. So, societies, they are allowing that with the new act. So, update your documents so you can take advantages of convenient ways to run your organization, and check through things. One thing that you will see as charities is when you hop onto charity services and you're fiddling around with officers details, they will ask you whether this is an update of your documents to comply with the requirements under the Charities Act. So Charity Services is taking this seriously. It's not one of those things. And I think I have seen a shift in this area where previously, because the size of how many organizations, were charities was, quite a lot of, a lot of organizations, there was a little bit of slippage from charity services, potentially them not necessarily looking through everything. But they are asking you guys to update your documents and they are checking about this. So it's good to make sure that you are ticking these boxes and it's not something that can kind of fade into the background and be ignored, as it may be. In terms of secondary documents, they cover things that Stephen has mentioned: privacy, health and safety, child protection, and that will apply depending on the type of activities that you run. So if you have children, if you run a kindergarten, as Stephen mentioned, perhaps it is appropriate for your organization to have a child protection policy, to have a health and safety policy, because they are relevant to your organization. if you don't do that type of work, and if your charity, primarily has a website and does services more as an informational hub, then it may be appropriate to have a privacy policy, but not necessarily a
Mm.
health and safety policy because that doesn't apply to your organization. So a range of different documents, and we wouldn't recommend just downloading, a blanket list of policies because that's not appropriate and it would become too cumbersome. But have the appropriate documents for your organization and constantly check and update them because I think, we are constantly updating our documents to make sure they're as best as they can be.
Yeah, totally. And even for us, like our
Excuse me.
trustee, in the last year, we've helped set up probably about 40 or 50 charities, but we're not resting on the trustee that we've got.
Mm.
Even last week, we added in a new cause. We're constantly evolving it so that it's the best trustee that exists in New Zealand. And so we're not just, well, it's done now, we can just not change it.
Mm.
We're always thinking, how can we improve it? And actually, sometimes that's because clients will ask a question like, what does
Yeah.
this actually mean? And we'll
Mm.
realize it's kind of still a bit of vestiges of legalese, so we'll get rid of it.
Hmm.
So, Emery, just thinking, we talked about documents.
Mm.
Can you talk us through what do people need to be thinking about when it comes to practices? What are some of the key things?
I think this is what people probably don't give a lot of thought to. And actually, it's important because it's kind of like the culture of your entity and how the board or whatever your governance entity, how it operates. And this might just think about things like conflicts of interest. It's a really big deal to have that properly sorted out within your entity. And yet we see very often issues with that arising because there isn't a good understanding of that or a good process in place for dealing with it. How you deal with disputes and complaints, and a really great the Incorporated Societies Act 2022 has really beefed up its expectation of societies, and it's now an obligation to have a process in place to manage complaints and disputes. And we see that as a really good thing because then people know what to do when something goes wrong. It's just nice and clear. There's also things like how do you onboard a new trustee? What is the process that you go through to make sure that they understand what has happened in the past? What are the current challenges that you're dealing with?
Hmm.
What is the culture of your entity?
Yeah.
And that's really important so that they can come in up to speed and knowing what they need to do.
Hmm.
But another one, and I think people tend to shy a little bit away from this, is actually taking a moment to pause and reflect on the effectiveness of your meetings. And that can be a bit confronting because it requires people to think, well, are we effective?
Hmm.
Do we listen to what one another says?
Mm.
Are we respectful in the way that we speak to each other? Are we using our time efficiently? So all of those things are really important. And there are ways that you can have a review like that, which isn't as confronting to the people involved and that still allows for incremental improvements in how you do things. And obviously, another really big one, and we see people falling down a lot when it comes to anything financial. So, when you look in the media, often what we see around charities is examples of people having done the wrong thing when it comes to money and how they look after their finances.
Yeah.
So it's super critical.
Hmm.
And, if you're a trustee and you're looking after an entity's funds, that's a really big obligation and it needs to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
So making sure that those practices are tidy
Mhm.
so that things that are inappropriate are not allowed to happen.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and can I just emphasize one thing in particular, and then we're going to move on to the next topic. The idea of induction packs. I just think we don't help our new trustees as much as we could. Why do we wait for them to say, can I please have a copy of your trustee, or can I have a copy of your policies? Can I see the last minutes?
Mhm.
Let's be a bit more proactive about it
Yeah.
and just have a pack that's ready. Here's the key things. Welcome. We really appreciate your doing this, usually in a volunteer capacity. Here's some documents that will help you to onboard in instead of being like, oh, and welcome Anna to your first meeting. Okay, on to item number one. Like let's be a bit more proactive about it and help people into our organizations.
Yeah.
Mm. Do you want to ask?
Okay. And so I guess the challenge is, the task is that you review all of this stuff every 3 years. But how can you do that in a way that is manageable for your entity and isn't like a huge spring cleaning exercise? So you can do it in little pieces and you can do it in a way that is efficient and meaningful, because we don't think there's any real point doing it if you're not going to do it with I guess, a serious mindset. So, Stephen, what are some of the tips that you would have for how do you manage what can be a reasonably large piece of work?
Yeah, so you've probably gotten a sense, and maybe when you joined this webinar, you were hoping that we would say there's not much to do, but actually, to review policies, maybe to draft policies, to review your trust deed, your rules, there can be a bit. So what we would suggest is you don't try to do everything by the next meeting. Instead, there's this 3-year window. So why not stagger it and just be realistic about how much you can do and by when? So, for example, we're going to review the policies. We're going to do one a month for the next year or whatever it is, like don't try to say we're reviewing everything, all of this by next Friday. So I guess just be realistic about how long it will take to create policies. I've put in the chat the links to some guides. So this was one about policies as an example. We help organizations draft policies all the time. And in fact, we're about to roll out a pack of policies that organizations could come and they could basically buy all of the core documents that you'll need for your charity. So that would make it easy.
Yeah.
So, not to be too selling of it, but that would save somebody a lot of time if they could just say, well, this is the top 7 or 8 policies that we need. The other thing I would say, though, is that ultimately the founding document, the trust deed or the Constitution, I think those do require a bit of thought and effort. So I would be encouraging probably a subcommittee of the board or one person be allocated the task to go and think it through. And that is where we often come in and add value, because more often than not, when we're asked to review existing rules, we end up saying it's going to be faster and cheaper if you simply adopt our template rules and take the best bits from what you've got, rather than us reviewing what you've got that was drafted 40 years ago and trying to add in the bits that are missing. And it's simply because the law has changed over time and terminology has changed. So usually it's faster and cheaper just to get a brand new set of rules that reflects what you had, but which are more modern and up to date. So focus on where the gaps might be. Focus on what the weaknesses would be for your organization. On this call, we know that there's people here from environmental groups, from early childhood, from, it's kind of politically related. There's vast differences between you all. So you need to identify for your group, what is it that's specific? And also, as Michael was saying, you might not need some of these privacy policies or some of these, well, privacy policy I recommend for everybody, but child protection, if you're not helping children, if you're not, you don't need it. So just be a bit of wisdom about what you need versus what maybe would be nice to have in the future.
Yeah.
So, Michael, just thinking about rules, because that's the term we're using for trust deeds or constitutions.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk us through a little bit? How would you go about reviewing your rules? And just maybe high level on that one, because we kind of touched on this already.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the things to look out for, I think if you start from, have a read firstly, see if there's anything that is scaring you or jumping out to you.
Well, you don't know what it means.
Exactly. That's another telltale sign, So have a read of your documents. If you see legislation that's, 20, 30 years old, you might not know whether there's been an update, but put it into Google and see if you're seeing, a new legislation that's come in that's replaced it. That's a good indication that you're perhaps not up to date with the latest, legislation. So, there's been a bit of change recently with the Trusts Act, as Anne-Marie mentioned, and the Incorporated Societies Act. Privacy Act has had, a change in the, past 5 years. So have a read through, see if any of these references are out of date, if processes aren't, appropriate, or, not consistent with what you do or how you want to do things. Also, I think the other thing to be mindful of is if they're complicated, if they're difficult to understand, if they make your processes more difficult, that's another thing where we can help you, or in reviewing your constitution, you can put it to your lawyer or whoever's assisting you with that process to be like, is there a need for this to be this way? Can we simplify it? And we would like to simplify it. So that's, I think, some of the key questions to be asking and considering when you are reviewing your rules.
That's such a good point. And these documents, they're based in law, but they also have a lot of flexibility and they need to work for you. So thinking about that and building in flexibility around things is something that your lawyer can help with as well, so that it isn't completely black and white. There can be a little bit of wriggle room, which means that you then don't have to turn around in 2 years' time and update your rules again. So, yeah.
And actually, just picking up on a comment in the chat. So keep the questions coming. I'm having a brief look as we're going through, and that there's some really good ones, and we're going to come back to them. And in fact, we'll keep churning through these points because I want to make sure we get to all the questions. But someone was asking if we had a precedent for an incorporated society. And the answer is yes, we do. And then someone else said there's a free constitution builder on the company's office. So just, I made a comment there, but the background of the comment is that in our experience, the constitution builder, it's kind of like going to put everything in rather than being bespoke and specific for your organization. So we've had some groups that end up with really long constitutions. And it's not actually as helpful as it could be, rather than spending a bit of time. And bear in mind, this is self-interested, so take it with a grain of salt, but spending a bit of time with a lawyer to go through and say, well, what is relevant for our circumstance and our situation? There is some cost involved because we have staff to pay and leases to pay, but it's probably less than you think it is. And it means that you end up with a founding document that will be there for hopefully the foreseeable future, rather than realizing in 6 months this isn't as good as it could be or should have been. So
we drill in and ask you the tricky questions and get to the nitty-gritty. Whereas if you're doing it by yourself, you may not know sometimes what to ask. And we see some very complicated entities, and it's important to really tease out all the little aspects so that your document actually works correctly with all of its clauses. So,
cool.
So I guess, you've, attended a seminar like this, you've maybe, had some issues or, incentives raised about what you need to do. You've reviewed your rules and you think they're out of date. What would you recommend, Anne-Marie, for them to do after that process of them reviewing and coming to a position where they think, okay, this is out of date, this doesn't reflect what we do? What should they be doing next?
I wouldn't ask ChatGPT to rewrite your rules for you. Sorry, we've actually done that and it doesn't work out too well. So we thought we'd just give it a test. So, equip yourself with information. So by all means, have a look at what it says online, have a chat to a few people. But the best place to go is to a lawyer who is an expert in the area, so that they can give you proper advice, I guess. So yeah, that's the optimum way of dealing with things. And sometimes we get given drafts that people have tried to create using certain tools, and it can end up being even more time consuming for us to review and amend those than if, as Stephen said, we had begun from the beginning. So yeah, it may sound counterintuitive, but that is actually the case. So, yeah.
Having said that, we do recommend that you take your existing rules. And I always say the traffic light system, get a red highlighter, a green highlighter, and a yellow one. And you know where I'm going to go with this, right? Green means go. We like this part of our rules. It works really well. Yellow means not really sure, do we need it or not? Red means we've never done this before. This does not work for us. So that can be helpful to then when you come to us, when we're looking at the rules, you can say, we love this, we don't want this. So that's a helpful additional factor to be thinking about.
And challenge your lawyer too. Say, well, look, we want to be able to do this. Can our rules do that? And we love hearing things like that because it makes it more interesting.
Yeah. And I think for us, in case you're wondering, because sometimes we get people saying, oh, this is really helpful. We're going to go see our local lawyer. The one thing to mention there is that we have developed a real specialty in this area. So it's a little bit like if I have an eye issue, I probably want to go see the eye doctor rather than the person who can help me if I have a foot problem. And it's a similar thing with the law. Because we do this so often, we can really help and add value. And actually, ironically, we're usually a lot cheaper than a local lawyer because we do this so much. So we don't need to be upskilled or learn about it. In fact, the Law Society asks us to go and train other lawyers to be able to give them information. So we just did a webinar on incorporated societies. I think there was 100 lawyers from across the country, and we were teaching them about what they need to know. So, you want to go with the experts there. So we're just going to keep things moving because there's some really great questions we want to get to.
Yeah.
And also keep putting questions in there. I can see them popping up, which is great. So the other bit that I'm interested in, just I guess with documents, it's really, hopefully you've gotten the sense, are they up to date? Are you missing some things? Do you have a board charter? That's what sets out how the board itself operates. What are the roles of the trustees or the committee members? What happens if there's a dispute? The IOD, Institute of Directors, actually has a free template that we often send people to because that's a really good thing to base it on. But we are developing this suite of policies. So Emery, maybe just we'll touch on this, the practices. What are some of the things that maybe need to be thought through there?
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of them, but other things that you might want to think about are your contractors and employees, just making sure that everything is in place, that people are doing what they're legally supposed to be doing, and that they don't have excessive powers, for example. We've seen some terrible situations where employees have been given excessive power relative to the board, for example, and that makes it very, very difficult for all involved. So just making sure that that is correct. And as we mentioned before, conflicts of interest, being very careful about that, making sure that remuneration is appropriate if that applies, because if you are charitable, that is one thing that people will look at quite closely. So, yeah.
So we're going to turn to the questions, but before we do that, I just want to acknowledge Michael and Marie, who are real experts in this area. So thank you both for joining me to talk this through. Emery, could I get you to sum up some of the key reasons why this is actually important for everybody?
Yeah. So when it comes to governance, you can't just sort of sit there and think that you're doing a great job and that that's all that you need to do. It really is, it requires an ongoing commitment, and there's always something new that you can do. And we want all of your charities to thrive by doing the right thing and by not accidentally letting themselves down by doing something wrong. So it's not just about the law. Actually, it's setting you up to succeed and to do things even better, which is really important. The next tip is you don't have to do it all at once. I don't do my housework all at once. I do it in little pieces, so it doesn't seem like such a pain. And then it just seems, a little bit more manageable. And if you discover something is wrong, you have to take it to the next step and do something about it. So if you need to take action on what you discover. So that's important too. And don't feel that you're alone. There are experts out there to help you.
Mm.
There are online resources. We have so many resources that are free for
Yeah.
people on our website. It's a really great place to go as a starting point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And in the follow-up email, I'll include some links to things. We have, for example, the Charities Health Check. We have the Charities, what do we call it in the, I think it was the legal guide.
Mm.
So that a handbook.
Yeah.
And we've got a bunch of other resources, including videos and things. If any of you are incorporated societies, we have a whole information hub for incorporated societies. There's, I think, 135 frequently asked questions that we've now answered. So, because we do webinars once a month on incorporated societies, I think there's been more than 1,000 have attended those. So, there's a lot of free resources. Our philosophy is that we want to make these things available for you. Even if you don't come and use us as your legal services provider, we have helped you on your journey, and that brings us a lot of satisfaction. So we're here to support this sector. So we're going to turn to some questions. Are you ready? Here we go. Keep them coming. We do have a little bit more time, so keep the questions coming. The first one is a great one. It says, what if your founding document is a private act of parliament dating from the 19th century, and the process for amending it is lengthy, costly, and not user-friendly? Well, it's a great question. And the answer, unfortunately, is that there will be cost, time, and effort to do this. So this was quite common, particularly it seems in my experience with religious organizations that sometimes were set up by an act of parliament or, 1920s, even earlier. So there is processes to be followed. It might require a private member's bill. It might require some application to the court to be able to make the amendments. It depends what the amendments are, like what are you actually wanting to change? Sometimes groups end up setting up new entities that can do the purpose that you want to do and have it almost under the umbrella of the old entity rather than the trouble of going back to Parliament and trying to get it through. But we've helped many groups actually do this. So it's probably one where you just need to reach out to us, send me a one-liner and say, this is the act, what do you recommend? And then we can have a quick look. We have a litigation team, disputes team, who go to court a lot, and they would probably be the ones who might end up leading that if you need to go. You might need to go to the Attorney General as well, because they're the guardian of charities. But that's kind of the short answer is we've done it before, but there will be process to be followed.
I think it also raises like an important question, as in if your entity when it was set up was created under an act of parliament because that was what was convenient. Is that still convenient now? Do we need to go through this painful process now of potentially allocating some time and cost to resolve this problem so that we can readjust our structure to one that's going to allow us to more in the future modify things and amend things easier so that we're not constantly having to, do we need to go back to Parliament? So I think an important question, and it kind of highlights the issue itself, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. And sometimes we end up helping people with what I call hybrid structures. So you end up with this entity here, but then you set up a company and they're doing similar things, they're connected, but they're not the same entity. And that can be helpful to reduce legal risk as well. Because if the company doesn't work out, you wind it up, but the original entity can continue. So lots of potential ways that we can help. Oh, the other thing on this is impact investing is growing. So charities are looking for sustainable income streams. So that might, instead of being under your current entity, it might be better to have a separate entity like a limited partnership or a company to run the thing that can, like social housing, for example. We want to support people in our community. We want to build some housing. So let's set up a separate entity to do that. So yeah, happy to chat on these things. All right, I love this question here. To change the trustee, doesn't it need a lawyer to sign off the changes for them to be legal? Well, I would like the answer to be yes, but the answer is no. You do not need a lawyer to sign off on the changes. And obviously we're totally conflicted and self-interested here, where we think that that's where we can add value. Because I have seen, worst case, I've seen people Google, find a document, sign it, it becomes their founding document, and it keeps talking about how they have to get approval of the Australian Food Productivity Commission or something like that because they downloaded a document from
Mm.
Australia. And it's like, this is totally inappropriate for your context.
Mm.
So that I think is where we can add value, is to be part of that process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your rules should tell you um, what's required to change your rules. So there's some homework if you go in and have a look at your rules and see what it says. How do you amend the rules?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then there's a question here. When will your pack be available? I think that's of the policies. Anne-Marie, what do you think? When is it?
Imminently.
Imminently. We basically have drafted all of the core policies, but we just haven't finalized it's all in one place.
Yeah.
But it is about to be released.
Yeah.
So,
And bear in mind that you'll have to tailor those to meet the specific circumstances of your entity.
Yeah.
But this is going to tick and the right boxes in terms of the law. So,
yeah. All right. Hey, Michael, here's an interesting one.
Sure.
We'll see what you think.
Yeah.
What documentation is required so that the charities services know that we have reviewed our procedures? Are meeting minutes enough?
Ooh.
Any initial, I have a thought, but what do you reckon?
So I don't think there is documentation required. You will be asked the question when you are logging into charity services.
Yeah. For the annual return, right?
Yeah. Also, there's a list of questions now. Charity services has gone through an update, I think, in the past year or so, where they're diligently asking you, is this change to, conduct a annual or every 3 year review of your documents, or is this for something different? So they are asking a question, but it's not a document or a form necessarily to submit.
That's right.
Yeah.
And basically when you fill in the annual return, there's now a checkbox which talks about, or it asks you this question: are your rules fit for purpose? So why don't we send a screenshot of that when we send the follow-up email, just so everyone's ready. We have a copy of that.
Yeah.
So that's the short answer there. All right. We got another comment/question. I put emphasis on the interests first, though sadly many trustees and incorporated societies officers don't really understand the concept, so getting them registered can be a challenge, whereas a potential conflict is exactly that and arises from a particular circumstance at a particular time. Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think having an interests register is essential for your entities. You should be listing all of the other organizations that you're also part of in governance or employed, just so that there's it's the front page of the newspaper test. Like, if I don't declare my conflict or my interest, then is a journalist going to be writing about this when that entity uses my catering company to provide the food for the 50th anniversary celebration?
Yeah.
And I didn't tell anybody that I also own the catering company. So, yeah.
Conflict, I think, is there's two elements of it. There's actual conflict, and then there's also perceived conflict. So that's two things to keep in mind, where, within the context of your organization, while a conflict exists and maybe completely, fine, and the other trustees make that decision, they're happy to make that decision, you're not involved in it. But the perception of that, if the story or if the process isn't covered properly, that can, as Stephen said, create some bad potential publicity for you. And, publicity is one of those things where to create a good brand for your organization can take years, and then for that reputation to be damaged can happen quite instantly. So you want to be careful with these things.
Yeah. And it might not just be financial, it could be relational. Like the example I give is, we're going to employ a marketing manager or something, and you don't, you employ the person, and then at the first meeting you go, big hug and a kiss because it's your niece or your nephew. Like, that's a conflict as well. You personally didn't financially benefit, but you should have told people that this person was a relation. So, yeah. All right, we've got a great question and comment here from Marie. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi to all of us. To stay sustainable, competitive, and relevant, more and more organizations are having to diversify to keep that elusive fund in their coffers, e.g., from creative arts to mental health advocacy in the guise of art to get funding. How do organizations navigate around this? Can we weave around being a jack of all trades, a one-stop shop? Great question.
Oh.
What do you reckon?
Well, you've got to keep coming back to your purposes
Hmm.
all the time. That is the anchor that you need to really hang on to. But the point about funding is a really important one, and charities are learning to do very clever and sensible and legal things to help them to generate money and be more self-sustaining rather than to have to rely on asking people for money all the time. And that could look like setting up a company that allows them to generate income, which can then be used to further their charitable purposes.
Mm.
But I don't know what you guys would say, but it's really, I think staying true to your purposes is really quite critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of discretion. Well, within a good document, there is a lot of discretion about how you achieve your purposes.
Mm.
So whether that's, running an activity, running a business, you can do it through different ways, but your purposes or what you're trying to achieve should be central to the different ways that um, yeah, that you go about it. Obviously, funding is important. I guess, the priority and the importance of that
Yeah.
shouldn't be understated. So we can understand the desire to pivot and switch. And I think, shifting is natural. Over time it happens. I guess you just don't want to go too far where you've shifted, drastically and, a small shift over time has become
Mm.
a whole, yeah, sector shift or purpose change from one thing to the other.
Yeah, these two will be sick of me with this illustration, but they know what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
You start this preschool and then you think, oh, I'm going to save the penguins. So all of a sudden you're doing penguin rescue and great cause, but not what you were set up for.
Yeah.
So it is something you need to always be examining. What is our purpose? That's the beating heart of the organization. And also, you should have purposes which you can explain to people. This is the elevator test. If you had 15 seconds to tell people what you do, that should be what your purposes are. That should be how you've actually talked about it so that you can translate it out so that, you're telling your story well.
I really loved in that question though as well those words sustainable, because that really indicates a fabulously mature approach to how you're going about things.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. All right. We've got a comment here that this person submitted a constitution for a group this morning for the re-registration. They had the new certificate of incorporation back straight away. What happened to being reviewed, checked, and taking 3 days?
I think that should be addressed by Stephen. Yeah, I think charity services probably do a more thorough review, whereas the register,
Company's office.
yeah, so the incorporated societies register and charitable trusts register, I think the reviews that they do from their perspective is a bit more of a lighter touch. We are seeing a more thorough review from charity services, and they tend to ask a bit more question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. But even if company's office allow you to submit your document, our view is that it should be relevant, it should be up to date, it should do what you want it to.
Yeah.
It's there as a tool to serve your organization. So if you're purely ticking a box that you've submitted something, that's quite a different mentality to making sure that this document is your beating heart and it does represent how you operate. So yeah, you could go to the free Constitution Builder and you could get a document and hit submit and it would probably get re-registered. But is it really helping your organization to operate the way that you want it to operate.
I mean, further to that, we see tangles that people and entities get themselves into. Maybe they didn't have any clauses to help them in a particular situation. The Constitution was silent. So you really do need something that is decent to operate
Yeah.
with. Otherwise, you can get into a real pickle, and that becomes a very difficult, potentially costly thing to deal with. It sours relationships. So, something sound and well constructed is really important.
Yeah, and in a way, this ties in with the next comment because if I have a problem with my tooth, I go to the dentist and I get it sorted. Like if I need a root canal, then there's some work that has to be done. And I know that there's some cost associated with it, but I hope that I'm then set up for the future without pain of biting down. And it's similar with lawyers. Like there are costs associated, but they might be less than you think as well. So just addressing the next comment was, in my volunteering roles on a school support and netball club, the funds are tight. How do we get all this sorted to ensure that it's done correctly but doesn't cost the earth and we don't have the funds? What would your suggestion be? So I guess the first thing is well done for attending this because it's free and hopefully we're giving you some thoughts that you can churn over. But I would also say at some point there might be some cost involved and you might need to apply for some funding or go around with the hat to make sure that your rules are up to date in the correct way. I don't know, like I wish I could do everything pro bono and for free. That actually would be a really dream. If any of you are multimillionaires and you can fund the operations of what we do, um, yeah, I think what you'll find is that when you get something for free, it's probably not as high a quality as paying somebody to really look into it. So I'm not going to go on Google and try to find out how to fix my tooth that needs a root canal. I'm going to go to the dentist and respect the time and effort that it takes to get it right. So it's a little bit like that.
Also, Parry Field, and really Stephen has been an enormous driver behind this, has provided heaps and heaps of resources. So there's quite a lot of rich stuff that you can dig into to help with a lot of this.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, good point. Yeah, we've got lots of guides. That link I put before has dozens of articles and videos and things. All right, we've got a question here. Will charities be audited to check we have updated our rules every 3 years? So this is the reality of public service and government is I just don't think they have the resources to come and knock on your door and say, tell me exactly what you have or haven't done. But it is a legislative requirement that you keep your rules up to date. So it's a little bit of a maybe a disconnect in the ability for them to enforce it. Remember, there's about 29,000 registered charities. So we're not trying to scare you like they're going to come knock on your door. What we are trying to tell you is that the best practice, and hopefully you've gotten the sense, having updated rules is good for your organization, whether or not they're coming to knock on your door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want a tidy house only when your visitors turn up? No.
Yeah.
So and I think with this, it's really important to look at the intent. It's not meant to be a stick to beat charities up with. We prefer to see it as a way of encouraging charities to improve their governance so that they can do the right thing and thrive.
That's right. All right, we got some final ones here, and then we'll be signing off. Is the 3-year law for charitable trusts only, or does it apply to incorporated societies? So it's actually for registered charities, whether you're a company, a trust, or incorporated society. So yeah, registered charities. Talking about conflict, I'm in a school support group where most of our partners are board of trustee members because the same families are doing all the work. Yeah, that's very common, but that's fine. I think you just have to declare it. And then, there's understanding that there is a bit of an interest here.
Yeah.
And we've got another thing here. Namhi Nui, Mai Hoa, for the valuable advice. Thank you for asking re the diversifying versus staying through to the kaupapa and the elevator test. Love that idea. Great. So maybe thank you everybody for all your questions. We love to get questions. And we're trying to have an FAQ on our site, the charities site, where we will respond to questions. We might see if we can pull out some of these actually
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and put them there. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that I've been doing a podcast for the last 8 years, and so the link is in the chat. It's called Seeds, and I've now talked with 447 inspiring people. So it might be if you're driving, if you want to get encouragement, that that would be something that you would enjoy as well. If you do, please tell one other person about it. It's a word of mouth type of initiative. And the other thing is that I'm about to release this, which is a little book called The Circle, and it's talking about careers with impact. So I've reflected a lot on my now 24 years working as a lawyer and what it is that has led me to do what I do today and condensed it into about 50 pages. Quite a short little thing. It's going to be released next week. I thought timing it with Matariki New Beginnings would be a really nice thing. So be watching out for that. And the three of us are all on LinkedIn. We'd love to connect with you. It's the way that I mainly put out new information and let people know what's coming up. But I also have an impact newsletter that goes to about 950 people. So if you'd like to join that, then we'll put a link to where you can go and put your name and email after this in the follow-up. Yeah, anything else from either of you? Any last words of wisdom for everybody?
I guess well done for attending. I think you're ahead of the
Yeah.
curve. And yeah, I think the charity space is a connected space. So if you know another person in the space, let them know of the things that you've learned so that they are also aware and informed.
Yeah. And we're about to have some governance videos as well, aren't we? They're being
Mhm.
edited right now on
Yeah.
key principles of governance. So we're trying to have lots of new information coming out. Emery, any final
It's an
thoughts?
opportunity, not a burden. So, yeah, embrace it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we hope this has been relatable. It's been easy to understand. We're not speaking in language from textbooks because we want to make it accessible. And if this has helped you, then when we send out the email, would you consider hitting forward to your boards, to someone else in another organization, to anyone that it might help? It will have a link to the video, and I'll probably end up making this an episode of Seeds podcast as well. So we want to make content accessible to everybody, but we need your help. We need you to be ambassadors as well to make sure that it's getting out wider than just those who attended this session. So thanks and appreciate all the thank yous coming in the chat. We see those. And we want to encourage each of you that the work that you're doing matters, even if you can't see the result right away. So I'll put a link to a little story I wrote called The Apple Tree. And if you get time, watch the video of that, and hopefully you'll feel encouraged because sometimes it can be hard doing the work that we do. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Michael and
Thank
Anne-Marie. We
you,
appreciate
Stephen.
your being here, and have a good rest of your day, everybody. See you later. Ka kite ano.